Okay, welcome on this panel about public policies. Oswald, can you please introduce yourself, please?
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Oswald Osaretin Guobadia. I'm currently the Senior Special Assistant to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and the lead for the Nigerian Startup Act.
Thank you. Felix?
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Felix Alaita. I'm also a Senior Special Assistant to the President of Nigeria. I was part of the team that pulled together the Startup Act, and I'm also working on other policies around the young and restless.
I don't have mine. Hello, so my name is Moetaz Helmy. I'm the board chairman for Afri Labs, which is a network of innovation hubs across the continent. We have 400 innovation hubs in 52 African countries, and our headquarters is in Nigeria. And I work with Meta on the Diaspora Meta Labs, which is a project that focuses on policies for African diaspora who live in Europe regarding the VR, virtual realities, and deep technology. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Noomane Fehri. I'm Maghrebian from Tunisian origin. I'm currently the president of the Maghreb Diaspora Business Angel Network, and previously I was Minister of Digital Economy in Tunisia. And I started the movement that you all know about it now. Thanks.
Hi all, my name is Freddy Mpinda. I'm coming from DRC, and I'm an advisor for the Digital Ministry of DRC.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Ali Badini, CEO of Crazy Access. I'm specialized of financing in SMS in Ivory Coast.
Thank you. We also have Mouloud in the crowd, if you can please display his name, who is going to take notes of this panel and provide the outcome to the AU conference, of the ministerial conference. Welcome, thank you for participating. We invited you because we hear a lot about startups all around Africa. We know that we have a lot of startups, entrepreneurs thriving in different countries. But we understand that often we need to get some structures. We need sometimes the government to actually help these startups, and we're talking about the environment, having some policies put in place. Oswald, maybe, can you please tell us a little bit more? So a few weeks ago in Nigeria, the Nigerian Startup Act has been passed into law. Could you please give us a little bit of explanation in terms of the process to actually do that, and what is the expected result?
Thank you very much. So I think first we'll just say what was the problem, right? What are the problems we're trying to solve? And what I've started telling people, being that I'm now in the public sector, I can't particularly start saying private sector issues, but I was an entrepreneur in Nigeria for about 16 years. So I'm quite aware of some of the business issues that do exist. But what I do say, just to kind of put a blanket over the number of issues, is that startups in the tech-enabled or any sector, but when we say startups, when we say in the tech-enabled startups, they tell us they want to disrupt, right? What they're pushing for is to disrupt and change how processes, how things are done, make something faster, make something easier, make something quicker, and so forth. Now, that is fantastic, and that's what we invest in, and that's what we want to hear. We want to see how they can make the world better. But from a policymaker perspective, what we tend to see is that something has changed, right? You don't necessarily see the disruption, but you see the displacement. So something in what we do every day and something in what we work with every day has changed. The policymaker's job is to protect what exists, right? And they protect what exists from a people perspective and from a process perspective and from the economical perspective. So they with policies and regulation. So when you don't have that conversation between these two parties, then you have an unhealthy ecosystem. And I think that's what you will find in Nigeria and probably in a number of other countries. This is the reason why the Startup Act is required. What the Startup Act does, it puts together a set of provisions that does encourage that conversation to happen and provide incentives for startups to exist or to create startups. In Nigeria, one of the key things we did is we quickly brought together members of the ecosystem. And we've come to understand the ecosystem. It's interesting, if you asked me a few years ago who was the ecosystem, I would say me, as an entrepreneur. I'm the ecosystem. But what we've come to understand is that the ecosystem is made up of two parts, right? It's made up of the practitioners, which are the funders and the founders themselves, and the policymaker, right? So what we did is we brought these two parties together very quickly. We call it the Big Tent approach. And we had them sit down together and have to put together provisions that we believe would solve the issues that we all know exist. So, interesting enough, I tend to tell private sector folks that about 99% of the act was private sector generated. And what you will find is that, what the public sector people would have done in our process was to maybe curtail back or bring some realistic feel to it, like, no, that won't work, we should do it this way. But the issues that were being solved in the act were brought to the table by private sector practitioners. So this process, we believe, would help create that conversation, which is kind of the schism between private sector practitioners and public sector people, to be able to solve the problem of dealing with issues that affect, the ecosystem. So what do we see in the future? I tell people that if you want to address every single issue with a legal document, it's going to be a 1,000-page document, right? What we've done in Nigeria is actually create a process, a framework in which future problems will be resolved. The idea is to create that value. In Africa, in Nigeria, we have maybe all three things that we need to be able to take a leadership position in this sector, right? Being the young people, we throw these numbers around all the time, 60% in Nigeria, I've heard 70% in DRC of young people. We have the local problems that need solving. So ultimately, you have the young people, you have the local problems, and then you have the market, right? So the entire continent is about 1.3 billion people. So we have the content, we have the marketplace to test these ideas. So ultimately, we're in a good position to create companies that can impact the world. But we believe what's required now is policy.
Thank you for that. Noomane, you have a mic around here, I think. Yeah. So, you coming from Tunisia, you say you're the father of the Startup Act. So you had a Startup Act for the last 3 years at least, 4 years now. Can you please tell us about, again, what drove you to actually put that in place, and as well, what are the results that you're seeing, knowing that officially we had the COVID period in between? Can you please share that with us?
Can I be really direct?
Please.
Yes. What drove me is the same discrepancy I saw today in our panel. We are 7 people, 7 men, talking about startups, where it's 50% of the startups are made and the innovation comes with women. So I know that but it's that the discrepancies which I saw when I became a minister is that we had youth, it was 2015, we had youth from 21st century, thinking 21st century things, managed by governments from 20th centuries with 19th century laws. So there is so much gap between these two. In addition, the governors, while they are all have good intentions, have only local delivery means, while their youth have global expectation. So it was really tough to find a way how to bring these people together. So we brought all these people together and said, literally, we closed the room. I said, let's have 3 hours, frank discussion, and see what we can do. And one of the guys said, we should do like America did the Small Business Act, we should do Startup Act. Say, done, let's do Startup Act, but that's just a name. What is it behind it? So, and then it took us 3 years to find what we need to do, and it was not government top-down approach, it was not a bottom-up approach, it was co-constructions from both. Thank you. Honestly, and it has building trust between governments and its youth is the secret sauce to get what we need to do. The startup law that went out and it was voted just after with the minister after me, was beyond my personal expectation when it started because the youth came and did it. Obviously, they requested, totally free zero exchange regulation, etc., which was not possible and beyond our means. But we find the places where we can go to the next level, like startups. You do what you need to do. You get enough money to go to the next level. When you get to the next level, you get the funding to go to the next level. So 3 years later, we voted. 1 year later, we get the all set up. So it's 3 things. Number one, a fund of 200 million that the government managed by private sector. We didn't raise it yet. We raised 80 million. A fund to have a small funds, the child funds are at seed, growth, etc. That's number one. Money is the real weapon. But money doesn't do you anything if you don't have the ecosystem. How do you build the ecosystem? So we put $10 million in building the ecosystem, how you can finance incubators, accelerators, etc., all programs like this, which really they provide real value. And the third one is the legal, because you can have any laws you want. If the administration doesn't put it in place, it doesn't work. So we had people from the administration to be the interface to sort this. Now, 2022, we have 700 labeled startups, funding like a lot of other Africans are doubling year on year, and we have companies who raised $20 million, Expansia, Instadeep, who raised $100 million, obviously not our own country because we are small companies, and we are extremely happy that we saw companies like Nordin Tayabi earlier who raised 150. It did achieve hope. It did achieve a movement. It did achieve, started something. Economically, can we put a real value on it? It's still small compared to the whole economy, but I think it's going in the right direction. I hope I answered the question.
That was perfect, yeah. Thank you for that. I'm going to move to Freddy right after that. Yeah. So, Freddy, we met in June. We actually discussed about DRC. And my question to you, my statement was, I know where DRC is in Africa, but on the startup scene, I don't know many, if any, startups. So we have Nigeria here, we have Tunisia, which usually are the country that we talk the most. What about DRC, please?
In DRC, we voting the Startup Act in a few weeks ago, but I'm engineering first. What is important in a country is not Startup Act. What is important is infrastructure. In DRC, our first step is to build a national infrastructure. Without infrastructure, you can have an ecosystem. We say, in DRC, we began 4 years ago, when the President Tshisekedi comes in the power. We launched our strategic plan, Plan National du Numérique, in 4 steps: infrastructure, regulatory, content, and market. The first step is infrastructure. We built fiber optics, all these things. The first step is regulatory framework. In a regulatory framework, Startup Act does not the things very important. The very important thing is digital code, because we have cybersecurity in digital code, we have electronic signature, like these things. Startup Act, for us, it's at the end of the process. A country like DRC, we don't have 100 startups in DRC. Today, what DRC needs is first infrastructure, regulatory framework, code numérique, and after that, Startup Act. But we have also Startup Act. And today we say, okay, Startup Act is fine. Without money, Startup Act doesn't mean anything. The next step for us is to say how we can build our ecosystem. And in our ecosystem, many of the startups need to have a public market. And they need contract. Without money, we can have an ecosystem. And in banking system, it's very hard to find money. And the next step for DRC, it's infrastructure, regulatory framework, and founding ecosystem. And after that, we can go to the market. DRC is not Nigeria. DRC is not South Africa. DRC is not Kenya. And some country, I have many times to go to all of the world in a conference. When we look at Africa, you think Africa is 4 countries. South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, or Tunisia, or Morocco. For us, it's not true. In Africa, we have 54 countries. And all of the countries of Africa have to deal with infrastructure. We say, first, we need infrastructure. After that, we can deal easily for the kind of Startup Act or kind of cybersecurity also. This is why we say, okay, we need a good regulatory framework in the country, but it's not the mandatory. What is the mandatory is infrastructure in first, because when we use in Kinshasa, we have many trouble to deal with internet. How you can promote digital without a good internet. This is the kind of things we need to do here.
So we can see that depending on the country, depending on the needs, officially, even if you have a startup having in different countries, but it is actually adapted to actually focus on the need, the impact that you need to have. Felix, please. No, that's for you. The question is for you. I understand that you work particularly with the CCI, so the Cultural and Creative Industries, if it's correct. Can you please explain to us what is the importance of policies for that particular industry?
Okay, so one of the things you hear from a vibrant, highly dynamic sector, like maybe the startup sector or even the creative sector, is this dislike for government regulation. I was in Côte d'Ivoire last week when Afrexim Bank had what we call the Creative Africa Nexus. And we had round panel discussions on how to move the creative sector with specific regards to the film industry forward. And you hear the same thing recurring from every country, from French-speaking countries to English-speaking countries. Regulation does not work for us. But I was able to convince them, because that's what we had done in Nigeria. We were able to pass the Startup Act via. If you don't have regulation, you have no framework, you have no platform. You can't dream in the air. Like he said, somebody's going to provide structure, infrastructure. If that person is not regulating you, how do they provide infrastructure? But the way forward, for me, that I see, is a mixed match of sorts, where you have intermediaries who understand the sector, like my brother Oswald, understand the sector they are coming from very well, get them into government, to learn the government side, and then find a way to balance both sides' needs. Because whether you like it or not, each side is creating value. But how do those values interact is what matters. So we worked around the policy of what we call a big tent approach or a whole of government, whole of nation approach, where we do a bottom-up analysis of what the sector needs and how do we respond to it without imposing regulations that they do not like. That's how we got the Startup Act passed. Right now, we're in the process of taking that same framework to produce another policy for the creative sector. Similar dimensions. I've been attending different functions where stakeholders engage, like this ones, for the creative sector, getting feedback, getting their ideas of how they think is best for government to interact with them, and then coming back to the office to put it together into a policy document that we can try to pass before our time is up.
Okay, thank you for that. Moetaz, please, can you please give us a quick recap of what AfriLabs does, and then what you do in terms of policies to actually help have an impact in Africa?
Okay, thanks a lot. So, so AfriLabs initially started as a platform for different incubators, accelerators across the continent. So the need back then in 2011 was really we want to know each other. We want to know each other. We want to know what others are doing in that ecosystem, either startups or innovators or entrepreneurs. And it's when we grow throughout the years, the need started to change as well. So we started to structure ourselves. We expanded very much in more countries. We find the need for a discussion throughout the innovator ecosystem. So what happened is last year, we found out that recently in the last 3 years, we started to play a more important role in the policy and with government and with policymakers. They started to come to us and ask us about questions concerning the ecosystem and the dynamics and who are the other countries, what are the current laws and regulations that can support innovators across the continent. So when we found out that there is a need in our ecosystem to really create a kind of a framework or a policy pathways to our network, so we came up with a kind of a guidelines that has been inspired by our network. So it's a bottom-up, total bottom-up model. It's coming from our 400 members. And we classify those policy pathways to 10 different guidelines. So I'm not gonna speak about all of them, but definitely the first one that it's a big part of our job is creating digital skills in the continent. And this is very important, creating digital skills and digital awareness, because as you are building a whole continent and from here to 2050, you are in a continent where 60% are youth. And those youth in a couple of years or 10 years or 20 years, they will be in the market and they need to really be exposed and understand what will be the need, not just right now, maybe the need in 10 years and 20 years. So if you are designing a policy framework as a government or a policymaker or as a community, you have really to explain that in which phase in digital economy are we right now. It's some people doing it as we are still in the app economy, which is, yeah, we are in the app economy, but this not will be the case in the coming 5 or 10 years. So when you design it like that, you have to be really aware about the kind of the deep technology, high-tech technology, VR, virtual reality technology, artificial intelligence, deep data. Those are very nascent science, and this has to be very well explained in our schools and our universities. So when policymakers are creating their framework and regulations, they need really to be aware that it has to be hands-on with a kind of awareness of explaining how this technology can be used in Africa, what are the different use cases for this technology, and how can it support us from poverty. If there is a study speak about how Kenya, their digital mobile money, how this helped Kenya to improve in their poverty index, and 2% of the whole population went they just because of this digital payment solution they went from poverty to medium income population. So the part of awareness and creating digital skills is really important in our policy pathway. The other one is we are speaking about how to incentivize, give incentives to startups or angel investors, or even taxes policies. So when it comes to startups, this is the part where we speak about like startup acts, regulations and framework. When it comes to investors, how we can really, how we can have like those investors in Nigeria come and invest in Egypt. This is the kind of how we can harmonize them and make them feel like the same success they did in the startups in Nigeria, they can do the same in Egypt. So it can be a win-win situation. How these very successful entrepreneurs in Egypt can expand to Algeria as well. So those are like how you have to create this framework for investors as well, and like especially angel investors, because those are the guys who can inject money on the entrepreneur ecosystem. So other thing that like, and most important is how to harmonize between all these policies as well. We have now, I think 4 countries have startup acts, a lot they don't have. How we can really convince other countries to follow and see success stories from, and get inspired from Tunisia and DRC and from Nigeria, and really try to spark the same regulations in other countries.
Same vision.
Yeah, I mean, till this point, one point, I mean, there's still a lot of countries, they deal with SMEs as they are startups, and we are saying, no, they are not the same thing. We have, I mean, you don't have the same, you cannot have the same regulation for both. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Freddy, maybe to Ali. Can you please remind us what Credit Access does, and as well, what is the impact in terms of regulations?
Bien, je vais m'exprimer en français. Avant peut-être de parler de ce que Crédit Access, donc l'expérience de Crédit Access, je vais peut-être situer le cadre légal dans lequel les startups se développent en Côte d'Ivoire. Depuis l'année dernière, donc, a été mise en place l'Ivoire Startup donc, Act, donc, qui a consisté à définir le cadre juridique et réglementaire. Et ce cadre-là...
Can you do it in English, possibly? In English?
Startup Act, Ivoire Startup Act, donc qui s'appuie sur 3 fondamentaux, notamment l'accompagnement à travers 2 organismes publics, l'Agence Emploi Jeunes et Côte d'Ivoire PME, donc favoriser aussi l'investissement pour des financements d'amorçage et non des financements en besoin de fonds de roulement, et puis créer donc une certaine dynamique au sein d'organismes donc afin de promouvoir davantage les startups.
Okay, thank you. A question to all of the panelists, or which one wants to speak first. We have different people from different countries or working in different regions, and officially you're striving to help in your own region or country. What do you think could be done in order to actually interact between countries? So we heard Freddy saying that they are actually starting. The Startup Act is actually not straight away the prime need. In Tunisia, they already done it. In Nigeria, you're actually doing it. But is there any possibilities from your point of view to actually interact with other countries, to possibly learn from them, or even maybe share the knowledge with them? Who wants to answer that?
Okay, so while working on the current act I'm working on, the one for the creative industry, there's a young lady that works with me that has been part of the process of creating an act for Jamaica, as we speak, for the creative industry. So what I've learned from that, and part of the conversations we had in Côte d'Ivoire, is how do we get people who are involved in such policy making to sit in the same room to streamline their policies such that we have easy collaboration across the continent. And I think a platform like this, where African Union is sponsoring, should be further enhanced to cater to that. The more conversations we have like this, the more our policies will seem similar, the more we'll be able to infuse things in our policies that enable us to cross-collaborate across different countries. Because you mentioned earlier on that some countries, population-wise, are not even big enough to sustain the industry, right? So how do we create sectors for the industry where countries have specific targets where their population can cater to, then other countries can outsource to them? For Nigeria, for example, is a huge market, so we always provide market for you. But there are other things that some other countries can do better. The issues of language will always come to play. The more collaboration meetings you have, the more you get to understand the perspective of the other countries who speak a different language. We had a similar experience in Cote d'Ivoire where it came to clear that there's a huge difference between how you look at intellectual property in the English-speaking countries in Africa and how you look at intellectual properties in the French-speaking countries. So if we are making laws in Nigeria and we don't put that into consideration, it creates a hindrance for collaboration. So these kind of platforms should be where we find a center point to achieve that.
Thank you. Noomane? Noomane.
Thank you. I'd like to come back on one point which is very important, said by the Republic of by RDC. Startup Act is not the answer to everything. Startup is one piece of a bigger policy. And policy is not only laws, it's not only legal framework. Policy is legal framework, and the day-to-day actions of the governments and of the agencies to work. This is we need. I'd like to go back what Oswald said. You want to implement something that solves a specific problem. So whatever, because it may end up to have, automatic answer, I have a headache, here is an aspirin, youth is not happy, here is Startup Act. No, not at all. And that's important to have it a co-constructed, not, again, it goes much beyond what any of us think when it is co-constructed. So if we go to the next level and say, okay, we have 10 or 12 African countries who've done similar laws, what can we learn from each other? One thing I would love to see happening from our policymakers is how we mutual recognition. You know, in 20th and 19th century, we have these mutual recognition treaties, right? For tax, etc. Hey, now you are labeling startups. Why don't we start to mutually recognize that startups, when it goes, if Nigeria has a system of labeling and Algeria has a system of labeling, when you go with your label, it's recognized to have a certain advantages or soft landing. That type of things may help our African community to benefit from each other. What policies, and this is something maybe to our dear rapporteur for our ministers, how can we make soft landing policies and we recognize each other? And by soft landing, I don't mean encourage other people to come to my country. Everybody wants everybody to come to his country. Obviously, everybody wants to be the startup nation, obviously. But what we could do, how can I help my startups to go to the neighboring countries, and I go to negotiate with the neighboring country for a mutual recognition, and then for them also to come here. And we don't start with a big thing. Let's start with 2 countries, Tunisia, Algeria, or Nigeria, neighboring country, or RDC. If we start, maybe then we will encourage real expansion, because why in US startups goes, they flourish very quickly, or in Europe, because they have single markets, and we don't. We have 54 markets. So by doing this, maybe we can help. Thank you.
Okay, Freddy.
In DRC, the next step for us, it's about funding money for our ecosystem. We we have a Startup Act, and we send also our digital code and the parliament. Hope in a few months we'll have the code up, but we need money. We need money because 4 years ago, many of our startups have a financial situation very hard. Government need to put some money to give some market, public market on the private. This is the next step, fund money, but what is important for us, it's 2 things. First, DRC need to promote education. Also education, our ecosystem. What I say is, when I discuss with many of startups in DRC, I say we don't need to go to Europe or to USA. Buy a ticket, go to Nairobi or to Lagos, you have the really world to learn. This is why we come in Alger. We need more digital cooperation in our country. For example, when I have a startup, I say, okay, go to Nairobi or go to Lagos, you all learn, and we come to DRC to do the things better. This is the first point.
Why is that? Because we can say for Nigeria, we can say for DRC, we have a large population. So economically, from an entrepreneur or an investor point of view, that's a big market. So why do you need to go to other countries then?
Yeah. The next point is we look more politics in sub-regional or in all of the continent of Africa. In DRC, it's easy to go to Brussels or to go to Paris. It's not really, we need to go to other capitals in Africa to learn. Go to Tunis, and also this the point is the big point: education. How to deal a startup. It's not easy. It's not. Sometimes you say, okay, I have an idea. I will build, for example, a robot or less. But to manage a startup, need education, and this is the way we need to go to other countries in Africa to learn. And after that, we come to the DRC. Yes, it's a big country. We will challenge of our food, and digital can help the food. Sometimes when we say startup, it's fintech. And I don't think it's really a fintech. When we live in DRC, one of the first needs is to eat. To have a good food, is in agriculture. And where digital can make a strong result, but we don't need to pay in 50 seconds. If you have money, you can pay in 50 seconds. Fintechs, it's okay, but a kind of agriculture is for us the next point who digital can move to agriculture and do the best thing for the country.
Okay. Moetaz, we're talking about educating people. Do you want to touch on that point?
Yeah, so I'm going to get back to this education point, but when you asked this question, I was thinking about in our network, in AfriLabs network, how our member pay to our office in Nigeria the membership fees. And we find it very difficult, for example, to collect membership fees from 52 African countries. And it's very struggling. It's extremely struggling. And it was like a big issue for AfriLabs office for a long time to preserve like a cash flow to pay our rent and salaries and stuff like this. And this is one of the like a day-to-day challenge that we face in across borders in Africa. So can you imagine in any startup who want to expand from, for example, for any country, like Egypt goes to Sudan, for example, and we figure out that there are sanctions on Sudan. And it's very difficult, for example, to even to send money to Sudan or to get money from Sudan, in our case in Egypt. And the same for Nigeria, like thanks we are having Flutterwave. I tried like last time paying the membership through Flutterwave and it worked nicely. And this kind of, and it's very important to understand that startups can provide solutions for this type of problems, like a very basic problem that we face. It's not like it's not a rocket science at the end of the day. I want to pay a membership fees to the main foundations. But back into your point when it comes to education here, I think for a long time, I personally had a problem to understand and to see the Africa map until I worked with AfriLabs. It's very difficult for a lot of countries or a lot of youth even to understand the potential of the continent and to understand the potential of digital innovation in Africa. And I think this is the role of organizations like AfriLabs to introduce this kind of network, and it can be a very good platform for youth to connect and to come up with new solutions and idea for that. And this is, it's very interesting, and we've seen it different times. And I think here education should be imposed not just on youth level, but even the AFCFTA, like the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, is a good platform that has to have, from my point of view, like a guideline or something just dedicated for startups. So the current negotiation in AFCFTA is very difficult, I think, because it's very complex bilateral agreements with all the countries, and I think this is the role that the African Union and the AFCFTA can play to facilitate this kind of startups and bilateral collaborations.
Okay. Oswald, you wanted to add something?
Thank you. I think a lot has been said. I think we just take a step back and look at what the issue is and what the opportunities are. You know, we have a lot of local problems on the continent. Some of these problems have been solved globally. They're yet to be solved locally. We have an education problem, which has been stated on the panel already. We have a lot of young, energetic, intelligent people, right? They also need their education. We have the understanding that this continent will be built on SMEs, small businesses. So, and also in addition to that, every single state in Africa has their own unique problems, as our brother from DRC just stated, and how to address them is quite unique. Now, to bring that all back to this conference, which is aptly named Startup, is the idea of why should African states adopt or have a Startup Act, right? We believe this is a great way to tap into what Africa has, which is just natural resources, right? And in this case, our natural resources are humans, right? Our people, who we need to train to be able to have the skills to be able to create new ideas. Why policy is important to this is that what government is meant to do is lay the train tracks for these ideas. And that's what the Startup Act does, right? It puts together a set of provisions that allows these businesses to become. And I kind of leave it there. What they really need to do is become, right? A lot of times on the continent, people have great ideas, but they die very young because of the political environment or the economical environment or just generally lack of policies. There's also the lack of trust, which we're not going to go into, but we'll just use policies to cover that. So what a Startup Act does is provide that framework to allow these business ideas to solve those problems. The way we believe those problems are to be solved today may not be the way they'll be solved in the future. So we may say we have an agricultural problem, like we just mentioned, or we have an infrastructure problem that was just mentioned. How do we know there's not a solution out there that would leapfrog every single telecom method known to today? So it's critical that we allow Africa to position itself to be the place where the new ideas will start, right? I found myself saying to people and saying it very boldly that, you know, the next idea that impacts the world will start in the African village. So you say to yourself, what would allow us, so if that's a vision statement, what would allow us to achieve that? Obviously, education, infrastructure, right? We need to put the infrastructure in place. But we also cannot get that together if we don't have the right policies in place as well. If we don't have the right policies that allow government and the private sector to engage each other in a positive manner to yield the right results. Because, you know, like we say in Nigeria, we have all the ingredients to make this meal, right? It's just really about pulling it together. And that's what policy does. And I believe that's why we're here today.
To that point, what do you say to entrepreneurs, that's a question to all of you, but what do you say to entrepreneurs who basically, and we had the discussion the other day, that some aspects, some industry shouldn't be regulated? We were talking about tech the other day especially. And as a follow-up question, don't you think that sometimes the regulation can actually hinder, block the innovation and the evolution of startups?
So what I say to that is that there's a there's a false notion. So one of the things we do on our continent very well is that we take ideas, mature ideas, and we apply it to ourselves. So one of them is innovation goes ahead of regulation, right? It's a fantastic notion. But I think what we need to do in Africa is not take that notion, is to create our own, where we say regulation and innovation go side by side, right? Because we're in a different place from where America is. We're in a totally different place. So what regulation, see, a lot of times we get it all mixed up for starters. So policy tells you how we're going to do something. Policy says this is how the government is going to do something. Regulation says this is what you don't do, right? If you don't have the right policy and regulations in place, you don't know where the lines are on the ground. So you don't even know if you scored a goal. You don't know if you've actually succeeded, right? It's policies and regulations that actually lets an entrepreneur know that they've achieved something that's repeatable. So if you're now doing a startup outside of regulations and policies, then you're basically doing something illegal to some extent, right? So because some of these policies and regulations are meant to protect the market and the people, right? Now, if the policies and regulation needs to change, that's where you have, why we're saying side by side, and that's what our father, we're talking about co-creation, right? So where Africa needs to be is where we're now co-creating. Innovation is happening, there's a conversation that's happening, and there's a co-creation where the regulation and the policies are in line with the innovation to allow the innovation to thrive. So I think that really needs education of both parties. Because if you speak to entrepreneurs, a lot of times they don't even know what the laws are, right? So if you read any newspaper, you will find there's a number of startups that get into trouble. You'll find those startups, they have no clue what the regulation was, what the policies were. And the policymakers have no clue of what the innovator is trying to do. So it's really about that co-creation is critical. So I wouldn't say, I will walk away from the idea of hindrance, although it seems that way now, but I would say we should push the idea of co-creation of policies and regulation to ensure that we're able to create a fabric of innovation.
Okay. We're talking about innovation and startups, and officially in this world, things are happening like super fast. How do we ensure that actually the policies that are being put in place are actually fast enough to actually, if not catch up, but at least enable the startups to keep going and striving and developing?
Okay, well, just like my colleague here has mentioned, when you run these two things parallel, right, then there's a level of ownership. For instance, while we're doing the Startup Act, even the investor community in Nigeria were part of the stakeholders that were engaged in creating the act. And our friend from DR Koga has mentioned several times, the major problem with startups is funding. We all know that all the funding for our startups in Africa right now reside in the US. How do we change that narrative? How do we get our own people to start to understand that they can invest in young people, take a risk, because it's risky, 90% of startups fail. How do they get to bring out their own money and invest so that the money resides in Africa? That's what co-creation does. It enables them to understand that the act that is being created will protect them, will give them access to people who understand or who run by some kind of regulation, so their money just doesn't disappear. And we hope that down the line, it will encourage more of us within Africa to build funds systems that enable our startups to grow.
Okay. Noomane, you implemented, Tunisia implemented the Startup Act already a few years ago. What is your feedback on how did it go? So it's been implemented, obviously there was COVID in between as well, but what lessons could you possibly share with the audience on that?
Thank you. Number one, the value was in giving hope to the youth and engaging the youth with the government to do things. And that's extremely important, because in our countries, you have three types of economy. You have the governed economy with laws and administration very heavy. You have the informal economy, But then you have this 21st century innovation economy, which can only be with the youth, and it can only work where the youth and the government, there is a trust. So that is achieved. Now, in terms of looking backward, we have 800 labeled startup. We wanted by 5 years to have a unicorn. We don't have a unicorn, but we have companies who raised 100 million. So achieved. Now what we wanted to do is to generalize that to the rest of the economy. It didn't happen because the central bank and because of the... that is how can we move from, this very specific high-end thing called startup, which practically non-understandable by Mr. Anybody, to that is the normal way of doing business, because that's the normal way of doing business today. We don't do business plan for 10 years before we start. We do policies for 10 years, but entrepreneurs cannot plan for 10 years. They can count on the government to have stability, tax stability for 10 years, etc., but they cannot do exactly this plan. That's one thing. As we speak, we have a commission which is working with the different actors to say, okay, should we do Startup Act 2.0? What should we do? And what they are doing, by the way, I know that they are working with you, Oswald, and with Nigeria and with other countries, to say, okay, we did that. It was a good thing, and the name was catchy, and everybody's doing it. Now, the others may have done something that we didn't do. Let's learn from it. I think, and it goes back to this thing of co-construction, government within the government, but also government to government. I'm not sure I answered your question.
That's pretty
okay.
One question as well, maybe Freddy, you can take it, but I'd like to hear a few people. In most countries in Africa, if not all of them, we have an informal economy. How do you think that the policies can actually change this economy?
Thank you very much for that question. Yasir, we saw earlier this morning, is bringing informal economy to the formal economy. The beauty of startup economy, it is getting the informal economy within the system, providing security for the people working on it, and actually helping the government, because the government tools are too cumbersome for the Mr. Anybody to fill his taxes. So they are doing simple application for tax. They are doing so that is, I think, the startups will. Government needs to employ startups in order to harmonize their work with informal economy, because government, it was clear that the government tools cannot do it. And that's why the economy startups is useful. That's number one. The other thing is, we didn't talk about it, scientific research. We in Africa, I know a lot of us don't believe in it, but in Africa we have a lot of scientific research, and scientific research is becoming more and more local. DNA, biotechnology, material science, etc. We have a lot of knowledge in our respective countries. So one thing, as we saw 10 years ago, some of us saw the digital transformation. We started to see the solution based on scientific research. Of course, there will be AI and digital, but the scientific research is also another treasure that we have in Africa that we are not exploiting, and they will be researchers on the lab, how to transform research from the labs, where the government is spending tons of money with great brains doing things, into economic value. And that's, again, one thing that we can work together between countries. Transforming scientific research into social and economic value using startups methodology.
Okay.
Thank you.
We talk a lot about startups and policies and regulations. What is the place of women into that? Officially, in some countries, we see that there are specific programs that are aimed at actually developing the place to get more opportunities to women. We can see today in this panel that there is none of them. There are a few in the room. Are they, when you define the startup acts, are you taking that into account to try to actually help specific, and women is one of them, but there are other specific population? What is your take on that? What is the process? So the question is, what is the place of women? How do we manage to include them into that startup act, into developing
Hubs, right?
women?
Oh, women.
Yes. With 7 men here on the stage, we talk a lot about including the woman, that the woman is part of the future, etc. But there is none there.
Yeah, I think because the panel's all men, so I didn't hear you say women. So, so the act specifically is not gender driven, right? But sorry, yeah, it's gender neutral. But I believe that the issue with women, apart from startups, in the pipeline is where the problem really starts. So we have a strong concentration in the provisions to address training, right? And ultimately how that is implemented will be to increase the number of women who do come into science and tech. And, but ultimately, the act itself, looks for people who, because they're non-tech founders, right? So if you're a woman, non-tech founder, the act provides for you. If you're a man, non-tech founder, act provides for you. But there's no specific language to say, this is for women, this is for men. It doesn't do that. Also, the act, the first aspect of the act more so is focused on a framework to solve problems on an ongoing basis. So I think I said earlier that if you meant to put every single issue in the business tech ecosystem in this document, it would be thousands of pages. But the document has a framework that actually any issue can be bubbled up as an issue and it will be resolved through the act is the idea. So if we find that, that we need to create special programs that are not in the act itself, it can be done through the way the act is designed, but it's actually gender neutral.
Okay, thank you for that. We're going to wrap up the meeting. Maybe what I'm going to do, Oswald, if each of you can take 30 seconds and give your final words, please. We're going to do one by one.
So I get to start first.
30 seconds.
Yeah, for me, I think this conversation goes beyond the policies and regulations that form an act, because an act is like a platform. I think the major issue I see with the startup industry is in the pipeline that leads to those unicorns we all want. How do we get more people into the conversation to create mentorship, to create training that will prepare young startups who have no experience to understand that they have to achieve some levels of efficiencies in their human capital, in their technology capital, in operations, in financials, before they start to look for funding that is beyond their capacity to scale. Because we all know that most startups that fail tend to fail the moment they start to scale. So there is a problem there in that pipeline. I feel that the solutions for us going forward lies in that pipeline and mentorship and training and funding.
Okay, thank you for that, Felix.
So adding to my two other points when it comes to incentives and education, I think diversity is very important as well in the discussion, women to be in women and diaspora as well. And if you think about it, I mean, African diaspora are really, they have a very different positioning like regarding the African continent, and different from any other continent, and they are doing actually the remittances is like 5% of the global of the African GDP, which is, can you imagine if this 5% of dollar that injected in the continent can be somehow part of it goes to the startup ecosystem and reimagine the model and the relationship between the African continent and their diaspora in Europe and the US. So I think this discussion is really important, and when it comes to African diaspora and women as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Moetaz. Noomane, 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
I will offer my concluding remark to any woman in the room who wants to do them. Thank you.
Thank you.
One point is important for us, for DRC. When we look COVID pandemic, we say it's a very challenge for innovation. That means sometimes policy and innovation is not correlate. We need to go first our problems in Africa. And we found the way to give more innovation to solve our problem. All of the world solved the pandemic problem. And in Africa, we have sometimes malaria. Malaria, it's a very, very, but 20 years after, African Union or all of organization do nothing. This is the way to promote innovation in Africa. Sometimes we need just to look the real life and to give the motivation for innovation.
Thank you for that, Fred. Ali?
Ça va, ok, merci. Alors, moi, je voudrais insister sur le caractère durable de l'écosystème qui favorise le développement donc, des PME, mais également des startups en Afrique. Les gouvernements ont intérêt, dans leur cadre juridique et réglementaire, à mettre en place des fonds de garantie. Et ce sont ces fonds de garantie-là sur lesquels donc, un certain nombre d'entités donc, dédiées au financement des startups vont s'appuyer pour pouvoir, on va dire, tirer vers le haut les startups. À Crédit Access, par exemple, nous avons conventionné donc, avec un fonds d'investissement luxembourgeois et l'association des entreprises qui activent dans le secteur des technologies pour pouvoir accompagner les startups. Et je vous dis, c'est un fonds de près de 6 millions d'euros par an. Et sur ce fonds, aucune start-up n'a réussi justement à nous présenter des projets qui soient finançables, tout simplement parce que derrière, en termes de mécanismes de sûreté, c'est quasiment inexistant. Donc le plaidoyer que je veux faire à l'occasion de cette conférence, c'est d'emmener donc les autorités, notamment algériennes, à mettre en place un dispositif de fonds de garantie qui vont représenter des sûretés sur lesquelles les entités de financement pourront s'y appuyer. Nous, ce qu'on a essayé de faire donc, pour les startups en phase de croissance ou de maturité, c'est de mitiger le risque en comprenant leur philosophie de travail parce que ces startups-là exercent dans l'économie de la vie. Et ce que j'appelle l'économie de la vie, c'est tout ce qui est économie de la santé, tout ce qui est économie liée aux nouvelles technologies. Et l'importance des startups pour aider donc, notre économie vers l'avant, le développement de l'économie locale passe par le financement. Ce n'est pas le lieu d'en parler, mais le financement reste très très important et pour cela, les administrations publiques ont un rôle à jouer en mettant en place un fonds de garantie.
Okay, thank you for that. Final words?
So Nigeria followed Tunisia on startups, so I will follow your lead as well, donate my time.
I'd like to give the mic to a woman to express her views.
Thank you very much. No, keep that move. Okay.
Stay here.
Thank you.
Noomane, please.
Okay. Sorry. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Emilia. I'm from Angola, part of the Ministry of Telecom and TICs as well. My idea regarding the African Startup Act and also the continent as a whole, I think we need to have an exchange platform so we can maybe conduct an individual SWOT analysis of each country ecosystem and get the best countries, the country with the best idea to help the weakest one and have a common platform where everyone will introduce the ideas, difficulty, good case studies, so we can start learning with each other. Because if there's someone who already did that, paved the way, so we can have the opportunity to learn with the best, and so we can accelerate the evolution and development of the continent. So this is my idea on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your contribution. Please, a round of applause for our panelists.